Hey, Parsa, how are you doing today?
Hey Liz, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. In planning for this talk, I was going back and thinking about how we first met. And I have to say that I was having some pretty scary flashbacks to that drive.
Yeah, it was a exhilarating and equally terrifying drive in the valleys of Northern California. Yeah.
So I know what I remember about our meeting. How do you remember how we met?
I mean, I remember being in Matt's car and you sort of hopping in the back and not really, being able to interact with you until that pit stop that we made. And I think you got a deli sandwich or something. And we sat outside. And what I thought would just be a quick conversation turned into a very deep heart to heart. And I ended up sort of spilling my entire life story. And you were extremely warm and receptive. And I told you that I was Iranian. And you told me, yeah, I love Persian food, which is a response that I hear very commonly. But you then started to list a lot of different Iranian foods that you knew, like dishes that you knew. And then I was like, okay, she really knows what she's talking about.
When it comes to food, I definitely do. That's that's very much how I remember it. I had talked my friend, now our mutual friend Matt, into driving us from San Francisco International Airport up to the camp where DWeb Camp was taking place. And it was his first time going to DWeb Camp, and it was my first time being in a motor vehicle that he was operating. And I remember getting outside at the airport, and Matt drives up, and I went to put my stuff in the back, and I saw his incredible collection of bumper stickers, which yet again reminded me why we are friends. And then I realized that this was going to be a tight squeeze. So he has an old school Jeep Wrangler with the fabric covering that he very kindly put on because I think we would have all blown away otherwise. And then I wedged myself into the back seat behind him because all of our stuff to go camping for a week was occupying what passed for the trunk section, I guess, and the back passenger seat. So I just remember being wedged in, and you were so kind in sort of trying to turn and actually look at me when we were talking. But at the same time, it was just sort of like, hang on for dear life and we'll get there. And none of this is to imply that Matt is an unsafe driver, but you really feel the road in that Jeep. And those mountain roads in Northern California are twisty turny. So it was quite the experience. But as you said, we got to the place where we were meeting up with other people who were also headed to camp. And I remember I got a coffee and I got a deli sandwich. It was actually really good. And it was the first time we had a chance to speak. And I was really touched that you shared as much as you did with me because we had literally met in the car an hour before. And I appreciated your spirit because you came with this sense of openness. You were also a first time attendee to DWeb Camp, and you just had this beautiful sense of wonder and open mindedness. And I thought, you know, this is this is someone I want to get to know better. And over the course of the week, I did get to know you even more. And thinking about just how multifaceted a person you are, I'm curious, what is it that matters to you that other people know about you?
Hmm. Thank you, by the way, for that. And yes, this is all reminding me of that adventure. It's kind of interesting that that's where we met because I feel like that was a turning point for me in the recent years. I I think one of the things that I want people to know about me is that I don't want to limit how I define myself if you talk to somebody who met me in high school in Idlewild versus somebody who met me in college versus somebody who's met me in the past year, they're all going to have very different ideas of who I am and what I'm interested in and, what topics I explore, but really at the end of the day, I think it's a combination of all of these experiences that make up who I am. And I appreciate you bringing up that openness because that has been my goal. And that's been one of the things that has, I think, made it possible for me to come as far as I have, is to remain open and take in as much as I can and let it change me.
Something you said there, limitations of self. I think a lot about how, as humans, we often limit ourselves based on what we think other people think about us, or what they will think if we show up as our true selves. And there's a wonderful line from Ralph Waldo Emerson where he wrote, "To be yourself in a world that desperately wants to make you something else is the greatest achievement."
Oh.
And that line feels particularly resonant for me when I think about you and describing yourself as the combination and culmination of your experiences and how you have let them change you and let them grow you, because it is a choice. I've met plenty of people who will tell me that they have 20 years of experience, but what they really have is 1 year of experience 20 times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has been the greatest joy of living the life I've lived and all of the challenges that has come with that, is to see how I've changed over time and how that change has, led to understanding the world around me in a deeper way. And it has also opened up a lot of doors, a lot of connections. I think even at DWeb Camp, I was, I was invited there by my friend Timo, and we bonded over metamodernism in college, completely rooted in the humanities at the time. I didn't really know anything about tech. And in fact, had, I would say, some sort of an allergic reaction to, to that world initially. But, Timo comes from a completely different background than me. He's a programmer. He knows how to code and he's very good at math. And that's his world. And we started talking about, metamodernism, and we realized how much we had in common in terms of our values and some of our world views and the topics that we were interested in. And he suggested that I go to DWeb Camp. And I said, okay, I don't know if this is the right place for me because I know nothing about coding. And he said, trust me, that's not what this is about. And I did, I trusted him. And I was at the time staying with a friend in DC and, super broke. And I didn't know if this was going to be worth it. I didn't know what I was doing. And I just said, okay, I'll just go and see what it is. And when I went there, I realized that it was this completely progressive bubble within the tech world of people who, for the most part, are all aligned with me in terms of our values. And yeah, and I just sort of started to take it all in. And you were very helpful. I think you were sort of my tour guide there because I didn't know anybody. And all of these people are actually very, very, a lot of them are extremely famous. And I'd be like, why is that person very popular? I don't understand. And you'd be like, that's the guy who created World Wide Web. And I was like, oh, that's why. But yeah, I think I've just tried to be humble and understand that I know very little. I mean, that's one of the famous lines of Rumi, the Persian poet. He said, when I knew the most is when I also knew that I didn't know anything. And I really live by that. I just try to stay open and keep learning and actually allowing it to change my interests, my priorities, and even, my values.
It is funny that you bring up the number of celebrities at DWeb Camp who are, interestingly, also largely unassuming people. You wouldn't know that they have Wikipedia pages that they did not create for themselves unless somebody told you. And that is one of the things I have most treasured about that space and the community, is that people show up as themselves, eager to learn from others. And it doesn't matter whether or not those others also have non-self-authored Wikipedia pages. It's that new people offer opportunities to learn new information and expand our horizons and experiences. And the ability to join any conversation and not feel that you have to prove a seat at the table before being welcomed in. That's something that is very important to me, because I feel like, and tech is a place where we see this frequently, there is a lot of policing of who's cool enough to be here, who's smart enough to be here, who knows enough technical information to be here. And it's very limiting and exclusive. And the thing I love about the DWeb community is that it continues to be inclusive and welcoming and open. And I'm so happy that you found that as part of your experience. And as you were talking, I kept thinking about how many different cultures you have navigated and continue to navigate. And from a systems perspective, thinking about the emerging cultures. In a sense, you are your own culture. You described coming from Iran and being steeped in Iranian culture, and now here in the United States, certainly fully living in American culture. And also your exploration of other cultures, and not just in terms of geography, but in terms of topic area and industry and interest. And I just think of you, as you described, letting all of it change you. You are a cultural innovator.
Yeah, I mean, thank you again for, I think I'll definitely put that on my resume from now on, cultural innovator. when I, yeah, I mean, one interesting thing is when I came to the US, I was 16 years old. I came here alone. And really the story was that growing up in Iran, I was always drawn to the arts, the combination of the climate there and all of the hardships and the oppression that people experience with my own personal identities and challenges. I'm a queer person, and growing up in Iran as a queer person in a pretty progressive family was difficult and complex. And the arts were my go-to to navigate all of that, and also to find some level of agency amidst all the chaos and all of these atrocities that make you feel not human. And it was very clear to me at a young age that I wanted to pursue the arts, that I wanted to go into that world, and that I wanted to do it in an environment that was free of the specific types of oppression that we faced there. And I found, I went online and I barely knew how to even use Google at the time. I had like a Yahoo Mail account, and I just searched, international art high schools or boarding art high schools with scholarships for international students, because I needed all of those different factors and criteria to actually be able to attend. And I found Idlewild Arts, and I applied and I sent them my poetry. I had self-taught English, and through watching American TV late at night, and I always enjoyed writing. So naturally, I sort of started to write in English after some time, and I got in, and I was 16 years old, and I came here alone to a side of the world that none of my family members had even visited. And I entered Idlewild Arts, and it was this bubble in itself because everybody there said, this is not what America is like. You know, it's Idlewild, for those who know, is this small town in California on top of a mountain. There are no buses that go to Idlewild. You know, there's no public transport there. You have to drive yourself up and down the mountain. And it's a very, very small town. And then Idlewild Arts is a very diverse arts academy in that town with like 50% international students, most of whom found the academy themselves. And I went there, and actually, DWeb Camp really reminded me of Idlewild in so many different ways, even just the ecology, you know, of the place. I mean, they're both in California, and they're both camp-like, really. And they also offered me a seat at the table, even though in many ways I was very behind compared to other students there who had been born and raised in artistic families, you know, in the West. And that sort of subculture is very different from the America that I experienced after I left. And so it took me 3 years. I was there for 3 years, and I got used to it, and I learned from it, and I was challenged by it, and I grew. And then I left Idlewild. I graduated, and then I relocated to Baltimore, where I attended Goucher College, and it was a completely different world. I kind of had to start all over again to actually even learn how to navigate it. And with that came all kinds of new insights and opportunities for growth. But I've been navigating all these different cultures, and through it, every time that I move to a new environment, it also provides an opportunity to reflect on the culture that I was in that I just left. You know, my relationship to Iran has continued to shift as I have changed and grown throughout this journey. And so has my relationship to Idlewild, you know.
So when I hear you talk about all of these different transits, moving between places, moving between cultures, I think about how we really valorize this concept of resilience. It's something, it's a skill to be cultivated and prized. And at the same time, resilience is hard won. In your case, listening to you talk about it, you've had to reinvent yourself. You've had to rediscover who you are and how you're going to show up and present yourself to other people, how you're going to negotiate and navigate new customs and really new cultures as you've moved between places. And I think about how, on one side, resilience is something that we talk about as prized. And at the same time, your resilience has largely come as the result of a lot of things that are not particularly fair to you. And I'm curious how you think about yourself in terms of perseverance and endurance and resilience. Do you use any of those words to characterize yourself?
I use a longer, and I think at times maybe even unnecessary, explanation, but I always say that I feel like I've been consistently at the self-authorization stage of Maslow's pyramid when I don't actually have any of the bottom ones secured. And really, I mean, I remember when I was in Iran, I used to watch these American sitcoms where it's, you know, the kid is living in the same block that he was born, and the neighbors are the same people, and they still have a relationship with them, and they go to college and they're still there, and the neighbors are still there. And that is so bizarre to me, because over the past few decades in Iran, I mean, first of all, I know that that's not really the case in the U.S. anymore either, but in Iran, everybody is moving away. My family were all spread out in the four corners of the world. We all started in the same place together, and there are videos of my birthday parties when I was 1 or 2 years old, and it's all of my cousins and uncles and my grandparents. And as we got older, we kept losing people, because they would move if they had to. They had to immigrate to be able to survive. And then when it was my turn, I started to understand it on a completely different level, how hard it is to have this gap between you and your family and your culture, these entities that helped you when you first entered the world to learn about the world. And I'm in a completely different environment now. We don't even have that much to talk about in terms of our daily lives, and so many other pieces. I lost my father in December, and I wasn't able to go back and see him, and I haven't been able to go back since. And that takes a kind of toll on you that, is impossible to put into words. And before my father, I also lost my grandfather, and the same thing happened. I couldn't go back to see him. We're sort of deprived of living together and dying together. And so the idea that you would be living in the same block as your neighbors, that you'd be able to have that consistent relationship with not just even your family, but your neighbors, and that would hold throughout the different stages of your life as you're growing and experiencing college and marriage. These are so basic, but we are deprived of that. Not just me, but I think anybody who has to leave home in order to survive. And of course, add to that the fact that I'm, transgender, and the fact that I don't come from particularly, a lot of wealth or any wealth. And yeah, I just feel like I've been thrown into the deep end, and given the fact that all of those basic needs are not really secured, I could have completely remained unchanged, to continue to interact with your surroundings and to live, really. That's what it means to be alive, is to continue to interact with your surroundings and let them enter your mind, let them get under your skin and change you. And that is really difficult to do when, you're also sort of struggling to survive. But I, there is no other choice. I think that's been the only possible path for me.
The energy and time that you spend on just meeting your basic needs. I know, I think I've mentioned it to you before. There's a line from an Ani DeFranco song called Talk to Me Now that I keep coming back to in my own life. Self-preservation is a full-time occupation. And that hits home for me as someone who has wrestled with the demons of mental health, that sometimes just moving forward, and not even moving forward, just holding my own ground, just putting the stake in the ground and holding the line can feel overwhelming. And as I listen to you talk and you describe essentially my childhood, I grew up in an apartment approximately half a mile from the place I was born, and I lived there until I went to college. My parents still live there, and all my neighbors are the same. And they still ask after me. And I still send them cards at the holidays. And when you describe it, I think about what a privilege it is to have that. And yet it's something that, had I not heard you tell your story, I would have just continued to take for granted. And I think there's so many things that, particularly living in the United States, we do take for granted. And multiple things are true at the same time, even if they're seemingly paradoxical. There are certainly parts of the United States, our culture and politics, our socioeconomics. I mean, there's many things about the U.S. that as Americans, we have an obligation and responsibility to work on to make a more perfect democracy, to make a better place. And there are also incredible benefits to what we do have. And I think it is certainly a trait that I've noticed in America, that we are very America-centric. And often I think we lose sight, I certainly do, of how much of a privilege it is to be here. And at the same time, how much work there is to do to be the place that we want this to be. I'm curious about how you've experienced America. Earlier on, you talked about being at Idlewild and having a very much bubble America experience, and then moving to Baltimore and having a very different experience there. How have you experienced being in America?
That is a difficult question to answer because there's just so many versions of America.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think and there are still sides of it, by the way, that I have not seen yet. But yeah, California and Idlewild were extremely bizarre because I think the kinds of conversations that everyone is, well, at least the people that I came across were engaged in, were so far beyond what I used to think about or fill my days with before going there. It really felt like there is so much power in this country and people are trying to be responsible with it and actually make change globally. Whether it was talking about the arts or technology, it was always bigger than life for me. And sometimes, most times, that was incredibly inspiring. And sometimes it almost felt, it made me feel split in a way where the realities of my own life and not having those basic needs secured in concert with these really powerful conversations about how to change the world, sometimes those two things just could not be contained, in the same body. And I would feel split, but extremely inspired. And I think when I went to college was when I started to get a taste of that bigger world. And particularly being in the humanities, I think in sort of late stage postmodernism and experiencing very heavy conversations about identity and privilege and all that brings, all the heaviness and the challenge. It felt necessary and claustrophobic. At times I felt like I needed to move on, despite the fact that a lot of these conversations were about people like me, and actually helped me feel empowered and understand my position in this world. But at times it definitely felt stagnating and it made me yearn for something else. And that's when I started to think about metamodernism. But I do think that's when I also started to want to move away from the US, not just physically, but I felt like I was done with it. I felt like, okay, this feels like too much for me to deal with. But as I continued to live in the US and I continued to travel and meet different kinds of people beyond college, the same thing as before happened where I realized how much I still don't know. I think that coming from Iran and learning English from American sitcoms, I always assumed that, or not assumed, but I think I learned the hard way that that the television lies, that these shows are not representing the reality of America. And I think I had to go through that to then understand that sometimes they also do, right? Like I remember I visited New York and I hadn't been to New York that often. And the few times that I did visit, it really, I mean, one of the shows that I essentially learned English from was Friends. And and you can imagine when I went to this sort of elite art school and told people that I watched Friends, what their reactions were. But I really sort of like trained myself to understand how problematic that show is for so many different reasons. But as soon as I went to New York, I realized that there were also truths to it, and in good ways. Like the attitude that people had felt almost familiar to me. And I was very excited. I mean, people usually stereotypically talk badly about New Yorkers, but I actually loved all the interactions that I had there. And it's just really, I mean, whether it's these big metropolitan areas like California or like at Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York, whether it's the South. I mean, I had a phase where I was listening to a lot of country. I was listening to but good country. Like I was listening to John Prine, and I really wanted to go to his concert, but then I missed my chance. And I just have not really been able to fully understand America. And I think politically, the same is true. I mean, with all of the fear and disappointment that's in the air, I also have seen a lot of progressivism, and they're not as loud and they're not sometimes even as quickly effective, but they're there and are also very resilient. And I think that I have grown the most and gotten the most out of that.
Well, I'm glad you put in a plug for New Yorkers, speaking as a native New Yorker myself. And New York is fascinating in that there is something about it that is uniquely American. And New York doesn't look anything like the rest of America. And listening to you describe your experiences and the paradoxes that come with being in the United States, that there is tremendous affluence and wealth in this country that provides incredible opportunities. There is openness and freedom here. And there are people with wildly conflicting opinions and views. And that a central tenet of this country is that people can hold those views and they can express those views. And it is incumbent upon all of us to continue to create a space in which people can speak freely. And at the same time, we're trying to balance this with creating an environment where everyone here can thrive, because we are more successful as a country together than we are apart. And I wonder, in your experience, what has been the most surprising thing to you in your American experience?
Honestly, I think the most surprising piece is how, in a lot of ways, it's similar to Iran. I have cousins who live in the UK, and I visited the UK when I was a child, and it is nothing like Iran. But the US is really like, it feels like everything in the kitchen sink. Like it really, you can find anything here. And I mean that you can find any kind of person. You can find anyone from any nationality here. You can find any kind of food or any product. You can find any kind of viewpoint. You can, if you're interested in, I don't know, alternative healthcare, and it's something very niche that no one has ever heard of, you can find somebody who practices that in one corner of this country. If you're interested in a particular kind of diet that nobody has heard of, there's a restaurant somewhere that serves it. There really is a lot of diversity here. I mean, I think that has been the America that I've gotten to know. And that is not the America that I expected to walk into, having watched a show like Friends. But I actually think that that is the America that held me here, despite all of the challenges, because of how many opportunities there are to learn new things about the world and about humanity and about yourself. I think everybody says America is an experiment. I think being in America feels like a personal experiment for me. Every day I feel like I'm growing in ways that I don't think I would if I wasn't here. And it's chaotic and it's scary and it really feels like you're being released into this ocean, but it toughens you up and it teaches you a lot. And it's, I think that especially the turn that everything has taken in the past few years, politically or otherwise, on all fronts, by the way, I think that the intolerance is really coming from all sides. That has been really scary to witness and to be in the midst of and to be vulnerable in the midst of it. But I sort of have this curiosity to see how this ocean of diversity and resources is going to rise to meet these challenges and these challenging times.
Mm. So I can appreciate that when you are in the midst of tremendous uncertainty, which you are, thinking about the future and dreaming can feel perhaps impossible or just difficult. And yet every time that we chat, I am struck by how forward looking you are, visionary, optimistic, hopeful. What are you looking forward to right now? What's on the horizon for you?
I've been focusing a lot on entrepreneurship these days. I'm really interested in the tech world and all of its potentials. And I do think that the future is going to be shaped by tech, if not fully, then in very major ways. And I think that I want to use my position to be a part of that change so that I can have some agency over it, and some impact and some sort of contribution. I've been talking to a lot of different people in this world, and a lot of them thanks to you, Liz, for introducing and making those connections. But I'm trying to start a journey and start something that, can make those changes that I that I want to see in the world. And at the same time, I think after years of living here, I sort of realized that, I for some reason I was always wary of entrepreneurship. I always felt like it was too, I mean, it's too risky, but it's also a lot to take on. And, I've already felt like I'm kind of in this ocean and I'm trying to figure out where to swim and I'm trying to figure out some sort of plan. And going into that world felt even more chaotic. But at a certain point, I realized that if you're in the US and you're not thinking of entrepreneurship, that it's like, I was like, I'm doing America wrong. Like I need to, like, that's what I should be doing here, and it's felt, it actually has felt great. Also very scary, but I think all of the creativity and all of the inspiration that I've had and that I've been finding an outlet for finally feels like it can flow, now that I'm thinking of entrepreneurship. And again, I have so many different ideas, as you know, and I have a lot of different things in the air, but I think that creating, inventing, and being part of these bigger dialogues and changes is my plan.
Mm, I think it's a really great plan. What do you need right now to activate that plan? Who do you need? What do you need?
I need any kind of guidance that I can get when it comes to entrepreneurship. Anybody that has done it, anybody that is part of that world, whether you're an investor or you have your own startup or, you're a seasoned businessman wanting to pass down your nuggets of wisdom to somebody. I would really appreciate that. Anybody who's in the tech world, I'm particularly interested in tech in the finance world, amongst other things. I've been thinking of small farms. I've been thinking of immigration, but I would love to have a chat. And in the immediate future, I've been trying to enroll in a program that's going to solve a bunch of my immediate issues and put me on the right path. And I've been collecting some funding. So if anybody's interested, I think contributions to that campaign would also be very appreciated.
I will be sure to share the link to that in the show notes. Parsa, what haven't we talked about, or what else do you really want to get across right now?
I think that, thank you, Liz, by the way, for this opportunity. I think being able to share my story and for people to hear my voice is very valuable and meaningful. Obviously, always being in dialogue with you is a pleasure for me. And a lot of us are critical of the injustices that exist in the world and in this country. And I think that it's very easy to, sit in a classroom and talk about them or write an essay about them or make a post, but to actually give people a seat at the table and to make things possible, to understand what needs to get done or what you can do to help people realize their potentials and be able to contribute. That is ultimately what makes a difference. And so I think that where I'm at right now in my life, I find value in relationships that not only understand the injustice that I have to endure or the hardships that I have to endure, but who also are excited to actually see my potential, and to really allow me to keep growing and give me an opportunity to continue to move forward.
Mm. I'm going to feel like Columbo for a moment, and this may be that may be a reference that will date me. But in the TV show Columbo, just as Peter Falk was about to leave the room, he would put his head back in and say, "Just one more question." And then that would reveal the clue that would unravel the entire mystery. I don't know that will do it in this case, but I have one other question that just came up for me as I was reflecting on our whole conversation. When I was in college, I used to tell people that I defined home based on where I wasn't. So when I was at college, home was New York because I wasn't there. And then when I went home for holidays and breaks and somebody would ask me, when are you going back? I would say, I'm going home tomorrow. And so home then became college. Home was where I wasn't. And my understanding of home as less of a geographic location and as more of a community, as more of a feeling, as more of even finding home in myself has changed. When I think about your story and your experience as someone who left home, and honestly, my heart catches in my throat when I think of it, because you left home alone 3 years older than my elder daughter is now. And the heartbreak I feel even thinking about that for my own child. And I imagine as a parent, knowing that you have to let your child go to be safe, to have opportunity, to have a potential to thrive. I mean, honestly, that type of courage as a parent takes my breath away. And I also realize that it is a reality for many, many people in the world. And so my very long-winded question for you is, where's home?
When I first left Iran, I left with actually quite a lot of anger towards my culture and my community, simply because of the hardships that I had to endure there that really at the end of the day had very little to do with my community or my culture. But I was young and I was too submerged in it to really be able to separate them. And only when I left and I went to Idlewild and I was exploring, I mean, I was a writer in Idlewild, and to write, it's really difficult. You can, play instruments and maybe act and maybe make movies if you, and I'm using maybe here, maybe you can do all these things if you don't fully know who you are and what I don't know, what your voice really is, but it's really difficult to do that as a writer. And a big part of my Idlewild journey was actually healing from some of those wounds that I continued to carry. And as a result of that, my relationship to Iran was completely redefined, and I started to fall in love with my culture. And it was very bizarre because I was away and then I would go home and I would feel like a tourist in my own town. And I was visiting all these different sites with the kind of admiration that an outsider has, kind of. But throughout the years, I think as I've aged and experienced more of this world, that has actually continued to, that admiration is still there, that love is still there, and I think it has even gotten deeper. And I used to love, when I was watching Friends in Iran, I used to always say that I wanted to leave. And sometimes I would even say, don't call me an Iranian. And it's taken years for me to get to where I am. But I think that home for me is now like always going to be Iran. And even in Iran, it's going to be Shiraz. It's going to be my hometown, you know. I mean, that relationship shifted so much that when I went to college, I would never use the word home to describe anywhere other than than Iran. So if somebody, you know, other people would refer to their rooms as I'm going to go back home tonight, I would always say I'm going to my room. And I even spent some of those years, I wouldn't unpack my suitcases because I wanted to continue to remind myself that I'm just a visitor. And the tragedy is that I'm also simultaneously trying to lie to myself, right? Because I actually don't know if I'm a visitor. I might actually end up staying here longer than I would ever be able to live in Iran, but we don't know what the future holds. My hope is that that wouldn't be the case, but you know, that one day the circumstances there would allow everybody there to thrive. But we don't know that. And in that not knowing is knowing that I very much could stay here for much longer. And I might end up actually having to unpack my suitcases, you know, and I might eventually get used to referring to, you know, my dorm or some apartment that I got as home here. But everybody who knows me, all of my close friends know this one thing. I've said it many times to them. I said, if I ever die, it doesn't matter where I'm at. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. I just have one ask. Please send my body back to Iran. And they always complain that that's going to be really expensive. But I really, you know, the thought of, I always say, you know, that the majority of most of our body is made up of water. And so if I could be put in the ground in Iran and for all of that water to be released there and to go into the trees, you know, that for me is home. And even if I can't live in it while I'm alive, I have made damn sure that everybody who knows me knows that that's going to be my eternal home.
I look forward to the day that you and I can have tea together in Shiraz.
I do too. Yeah, absolutely. And if it's tea, it's going to be followed by a whole lot of other food, Liz. So
get the Fessenjan ready.
Yes. We're gonna feed you a lot.
We're gonna go to town. Well, Parsa, your friendship feeds me. I am blessed by you, and I am so grateful to have you in my life, and I want you around for a really, really long time. And yes, I will remember where you want to be for eternal rest. For the moment, I'm just really happy that you're here.
Thank you so much, Liz, and likewise, I'm forever grateful for your friendship and for that car ride. Thanks to Matt.
Thanks to Matt.